During the days when the German attempt to capture Stalingrad ended in failure, the Soviet Red Army launched their general offensive in the south with the Operation Little Saturn, pushing back all German forces south of the Don River and retaking Rostov from the Germans. Following this defeat, Hitler delegated authority to plan the war to the German High Command and ordered the swift recovery of lost territory. On February 6, 1943, Hitler met with Manstein and tasked him with defending against the advancing Soviet forces towards the Donbass region. Manstein quickly took action and on February 12 reorganized the German forces and took command of the South Army Group. Meanwhile, on February 8th, Kursk was captured by the Red Army, followed by the Belgorod on February 10th and the important city of Kharkov on February 18th. After shifting to the Western Front and with the arrival of the panzer units, Manstein prepared for an attack against the Soviet army on February 19th. Despite being tired, the German army, with Manstein's superior tactics, began surrounding and destroying the larger Red Army units south of Kharkov. After completely surrounding the city by March 7th, Manstein launched an attack to capture it on March 11th. Following 4 days of fighting, the Germans completely captured Kharkov on March 15th, and just 3 days later, they took control of the important city of Belgorod. This led to the formation of Kursk salient, which would later become the site of the largest tank battle of World War II. Manstein didn't push further and postponed the Kursk offensive to later dates due to the bad weather conditions and the need to reorganize the exhausted German forces. On April 15th, Hitler ordered the Kursk offensive, which he named Operation Citadel, to be launched on May 3rd. However, Manstein wasn't pleased with waiting, as it allowed the Soviet army to concentrate and strengthen their defenses in the area. On April 27th, Hitler postponed the operation once again and ordered it to be launched on June 12th, summoning all high-ranking generals to Berlin to discuss the plan of the operation. The commander of the German armored forces, General Zeitzler, suggested that a siege attack from the north and south flanks of Kursk could inflict heavy losses on the Soviets and lead to an easy victory. On the other hand, General Manstein believed that a more beneficial strategy would be to launch an attack towards the east from a wider front line, and Panzer Commander Guderian also supported this plan. However, for reasons unknown, Hitler insisted on capturing Kursk first and straightening the German front line. The meeting ended without a decision being made and was postponed to May 3 and 4. Meanwhile, in the Polish city of Warsaw, the Polish people began an uprising against the Nazi regime and attacked German soldiers with a small number of weapons smuggled into the city. After a few days of fighting, the heavily damaged German troops were forced to withdraw from the city. The approximately 1 month-long uprising was suppressed by German forces, supported by reinforcements on May 16, 1943. This short-lived victory gave hope to Polish fighters for a larger resistance in the future. Regarding the Battle of Kursk, the Soviet army, taking advantage of the fact that the Germans were dealing with the Warsaw Uprising, had established a strong defense line on both the northern and southern flanks of Kursk, and even built a main defense line 7 km east of the Kursk. After intense debates, Hitler and his team decided to implement General Zeitzler's plan. However, due to the various delays and technical issues, the operation was postponed multiple times until July 4, 1943. Finally, on July 2, 1943, 3,000 tanks, 2,110 planes, and 900,000 soldiers were ready for Kursk. On July 4, German panzers attacked both the northern and southern Soviet advance posts. Followed by the German planes bombarding the northern Soviet positions and creating a 4-kilometer gap in the Soviet lines. At 2 a.m. on July 5th, Soviet General Zhukov ordered General WW2 to bomb the German positions with approximately 600 artillery pieces, causing the German advance to stop. As the morning dawned, Soviet planes began bombing the German artillery positions, but the attack was ineffective and resulted in the loss of around 100 Soviet planes. Luftwaffe managed to gain air superiority over the southern front until July 11, but failed to do so on the northern front. In the first 2 days of the battle, the Red Army lost 42 tanks, while the Germans lost 5 Tiger tanks. On July 6, Rokossovsky launched an attack with 300 tanks and air support against the German units in the north. In the ensuing battle between Soviet T-34 tanks and German Tiger tanks, the Germans lost 69 tanks, while the Soviets lost 24 tanks. The northern advance stopped at the 45th kilometer due to the German soldiers finding themselves in a minefield and being hunted by the Soviet artillery. From this point on, the battles on the northern front would be fought with mature tank attacks. On the southern front, the Germans captured Korocha, 40 kilometers south of Kursk, on the night of July 7. On July 8, German General WW2 ordered a counterattack with a force of 593 tanks and 200 planes. However, due to the German air superiority, 50 Soviet tanks were destroyed within an hour, and WW2 ordered the attack to be halted to preserve their current positions. Despite appearing unsuccessful, the attack had managed to push back the German positions. Therefore, Manstein ordered his southern attack towards Prokhovka. During July 10th and 11th, the Panzer Army in the south continued its attack towards its new target, reaching as close as 3 kilometers to Prokhovka by the night of July 11th. The following day, the Germans attempted to launch an assault to take the city, but the Soviet forces under the command of General Rotmistrov repelled them. On the evening of July 12, Hitler summoned General Kluge and Manstein to his headquarters in East Prussia. Just 2 days prior, the Western Allies had invaded Sicily, leading Hitler to order the halt of the Kursk offensive and to relocate the troops there to Italy or southern France. General Kluge welcomed this order, but General Manstein didn't. Believing they could defeat the Soviets in open terrain, Manstein wished to try his luck a bit longer. Thus, Hitler commanded the northern troops to be sent to Italy, and for Manstein's southern front operations to continue for a while longer. Manstein resumed his attacks on July 14th with Hitler's permission, but he underestimated the strength of the Soviet forces and suffered heavy losses. Despite intense air attacks, Manstein was unable to breach the Soviet defense and gradually lost air superiority. In just 3 days, 193 German planes were shot down by Soviet forces. On July 17th, Manstein decided to completely abandon the fortress operation due to his inability to break through the Soviet front. The approximately 13-day-long operation resulted in the complete destruction or disabling of 1,800 German tanks and 2,100 Soviet tanks. Casualties on the German side numbered 54,182, while the Soviet side recorded 177,847. The failed fortress operation was the last major offensive on the Eastern Front by the Germans, and the initiative shifted to the Soviet Union. On July 12, the Red Army launched the Kutuzov operation to capture Oryol from the Germans, who had 300,000 troops and 625 tanks defending the city. The Red Army amassed 1,280,000 troops and 2,500 tanks to attack. The assault began in the early morning of July 12, but the Germans put up a fierce defense. Soviet planes hunted German tanks, while German planes chased Soviet planes attacking their tanks. After a month and 6 days of fighting, the Germans were forced to evacuate Oriol and retreat to Bryansk, suffering 86,500 casualties, losing 450 tanks and 218 planes. The Soviet Union lost 430,000 soldiers, 2,586 tanks, and 1,014 planes. In the south, the Rumyantsev operation was planned to capture Belgorod and Kharkov. The Red Army mobilized 1,200,000 troops and 2,500 tanks against 200,000 German troops and 227 tanks defending Belgorod. The attack began on August 3rd, although repeatedly interrupted by German air attack. The Red Army steadily advanced. General Manstein and General Ivan Konev employed all their tactics in this tank battle, which lasted until August 23rd, with the victory going to the Soviet Union. The Germans lost their gains from the fortress operation and retreated from Belgorod to Kharkov. Despite suffering heavy losses, Manstein refused to follow Hitler's order to hold on to Kharkov until the end and retreated. On August 23rd, the important city of Kharkov fell to the Soviet Union. The successful operation resulted in 1,000 German casualties, the loss of 240 tanks and 103 planes, while the Soviet Union lost 71,000 soldiers, 1,864 tanks and 153 planes. The Kursk battles witnessed the largest tank battles and the most casualties in a single day of aerial combat during World War II. The fighting lasted for a total of 1.5 months, resulting in approximately 1.3 million casualties on both sides. As the battles raged on in the south, the Red Army planned an operation to capture Bryansk and Smolensk, which have been under German occupation since 1941. The operation began on August 7, 1943, with the Red Army's artillery bombarding German positions at 4:40 in the morning. However, the Red Army was met with the fierce German resistance and struggled to make any headway. General Rokossovsky, the commander at the beginning of the operation, later wrote that they literally threw themselves one by one into the German lines. On the first day of the offensive, despite artillery, tank, and air support, Soviet forces were only able to advance 4 kilometers. On the second day, they made another 6 kilometers to the north, but the German counterattacks throughout August brought the Soviet advance to a complete halt. However, on August 28th, the Soviet Union launched a general offensive towards Smolensk, which resulted in a complete reversal of the situation. In just one day, the Red Army captured a 15-kilometer deep and 100-kilometer wide stretch of land. On August 30, after suffering heavy losses, the German army was forced to evacuate Yelnya and retreat to Smolensk. The Soviet forces were reinforced and prepared for the next offensive between September 7th and 14th. On September 14th, with a large force, the Red Army launched an attack on all fronts and captured Bryansk and Smolensk on September 25th, advancing 250 kilometers to reach the eastern bank of the Dnieper River by October 2nd. Finally, the German soldiers were pushed far away from the capital Moscow, and the Soviet Union could take a breath. The next target for the Red Army was the important city of Kiev. Before the Kiev operation, Adolf Hitler ordered his army to retreat west of the Dnieper River due to the Allies landing in the southern Italy and the Soviet army's capture of all the significant areas along the Dnieper line. This enabled the Soviet Union to easily capture Zaporizhia, Dnipro, Melitopol, and many other important cities by the end of October. The Crimea was also being cleared of German forces. Now Kiev was the next target. On November 3, 1943, General Vatutin's forces launched a massive attack towards Kiev with a large force. The Red Army units that spread from the north of the city to the southwest started to besiege the city. General Manstein, realizing that the siege couldn't be prevented, evacuated his army from the city before the siege was completed. Thus, Kiev was completely captured by the Red Army on November 6, 1943. After the capture of Kiev, no significant progress was made until December. During this time, the city of Zhytomyr changed hands 4 times between the Red Army and the Nazis. Finally, on December 31st, the Dnieper offensive was concluded and the city of Zhytomyr was permanently under the control of the Red Army. Hitler's insistence on holding the Dnieper line despite heavy losses caused a disagreement between him and Manstein. Manstein proposed allowing the Soviet forces to advance further, accepting more losses of territory, and creating a situation where they could be easily surrounded from the flanks rather than defending and suffering daily losses. Hitler favored a war of attrition, but after much discussion, Manstein began openly stating that Hitler needed to relinquish command of Eastern Front to his generals. However, Hitler refused, fearing his power would weaken. On January 12, 1944, the Red Army began an operation to rescue Leningrad, which had been under siege since the beginning of the war. In the early hours of January 12, the Red Army broke through the strong German defenses south of Lake Ladoga, and after 15 days of fighting, the German army realized that they could no longer hold on and began to retreat on January 27th. This ended the 872-day-long siege of Leningrad. On February 28th, Soviet Marshal Vatutin was seriously injured in an assassination attempt by Nazi sympathizers in Ukraine and died 2 months later. In March, the Soviet Union continued its offensive in the south and captured all the territory up to the Romanian border, including Moldova. Meanwhile, the 60,000-strong German army that was besieged in the city of Kherson in Ukraine suffered a fate similar to that of Stalingrad and was completely destroyed by the Red Army. In May, the Red Army captured Sevastopol, bringing the entire Crimea under its control. After meeting his senior generals, Stalin set new targets for the Soviet Union: the Baltic region and Belarus. Under the leadership of General Rokossovsky, the Red Army prepared to launch an offensive towards the Baltic countries and Belarus, Poland. The German forces defending the offensive area consisted of 460,000 soldiers, 118 tanks, and 600 aircraft, while General Rokossovsky prepared 1.7 million soldiers, 3,000 tanks, and 5,500 aircraft. The offensive began on June 22, 1944, with an unprecedentedly intense artillery bombardment. The date was chosen because June 22, 1941 was the day the Germans opened the Eastern Front. As a result of the intense bombardment, the German defense lines began to break down and the Red Army launched a sudden attack. By June 27th, the Red Army had captured Mogilev and Bobruisk, destroying approximately 70,000 German soldiers. The main target of the offensive, Minsk, was now within reach. On July 1st, the Red Army began to rapidly advance towards Minsk from 3 directions, pushing back the Germans and entering the city on July 3rd. After fierce fighting, the Red Army surrounded the city from the north and west, trapping the 100,000-strong German army group in the city due to Hitler's orders not to retreat. On the evening of July 4th, the Red Army captured Minsk and the German army group was completely destroyed. This defeat was probably Hitler's second largest defeat of World War II. As the situation continued to worsen, a group of opposition generals, including marshals, attempted to assassinate Hitler with a bomb at the headquarters in Rastenburg, East Prussia. On July 20, 1944, although the bomb exploded next to him, Hitler survived the assassination attempt. Returning to the front, the fall of Minsk caused the German army's resistance to collapse entirely. In August, the Red Army came within 10 km of Warsaw and surrounded the German forces in Estonia by controlling a line extending to the Gulf of Riga in the north. Inspired by the Soviet Union's advance towards Warsaw, Polish rebels launched another uprising against the Nazis in Warsaw on August 1, 1944. The Soviet Union decided to end their offensive on this front on August 19th after taking control of Vilnius and Kaunas in the north and Lviv in the south. The casualties from this offensive were approximately 300,000 dead, 250,000 wounded, and 120 prisoners on the German side, while the Red Army suffered approximately 60,000 dead, 110,000 wounded, and around 8,000 prisoners. The Soviet High Command's next target was Romania, which was experiencing internal turmoil. On August 20th, Soviet troops launched an offensive from the west of Romania and encircled the German 6th Army on August 22nd. After being completely destroyed once in Stalingrad, the reformed 6th Army was completely destroyed again on August 23, 1944. On the same day, Romania's King Michael organized a coup against Nazi sympathizer Prime Minister Ion Antonescu and surrendered to the Allies, declaring war on Germany. As a result of this unexpected turn of events, the collapse of the Romanian front caused the German 8th Army in the north to suffer heavy losses and withdraw to Hungary. Following the Soviet victory in Romania, Bulgaria surrendered to the Soviet Union on August 26, 1944. Bulgaria was completely occupied by the Soviet Union on September 8, and Romania was fully occupied on September 24. Meanwhile, on September 19, Finland signed a ceasefire agreement to withdraw from the war. After this victory, the Red Army launched simultaneous offensives towards Hungary, Yugoslavia, and the Baltic countries. By the end of October, the Germans had been completely driven out of Estonia and Lithuania, and the remaining forces in Latvia were surrounded. As for the Balkans, in mid-September, Yugoslav forces began to resist the Nazi occupation, and the Soviet army that came to their aid began to attack Belgrade. Romanian and Bulgarian forces also supported the offensive, while Allied forces landed on the Peloponnese Peninsula and began to advance north. The German forces, struggling to resist attacks from all sides, began to evacuate Belgrade and Macedonia and withdraw northward. Finally, on October 20, 1944, Belgrade was taken by the Soviet-Yugoslav Joint Forces. Turning to the Hungarian front, the Red Army advanced towards Budapest step by step by November onwards and laid siege to the city at the end of December. The number of German and Hungarian soldiers trapped in Budapest was approximately 80,000. Although they continued to resist for a while longer, the Nazis lost 50,000 soldiers by mid-February and were forced to surrender on February 13. With the occupation of Budapest by the Soviet army on the same day, the German Southern Army Group collapsed, opening the way for the Soviets and their allies towards Vienna, Czechoslovakia, and the southern border of Germany. Meanwhile, on January 17, after intense fighting, Warsaw was finally captured by the Soviet army. From this point on, the Red Army would continue its offensive towards the heart of Germany, attempting to occupy Berlin before the Americans. In January and February, the Red Army launched attacks towards Berlin, taking control of East Prussia, Danzig, and Poznan, before being stopped by German defenses 60 km west of Berlin. Stalin met with his two elite generals, Zhukov and Konev, to explain the importance of capturing Berlin before the Americans. He even promised a bright future to whichever general captured Berlin. On April 13, after the fall of Vienna, Hitler, feeling increasingly concerned, ordered the defense of Berlin until the last soldier fell. After a month of preparation by both the German and Soviet sides, the Red Army began its attacks on Berlin on April 20, 1945, Hitler's birthday. As a result of attacks by both General Zhukov and General Konev, Berlin was encircled. On April 30, Adolf Hitler committed suicide, acknowledging his defeat in the war, and on May 2, 1945, Berlin was completely encircled by the Red Army. General Zhukov was closer to the victory, so General Konev headed towards Prague at the beginning of May. Although a large part of the German army surrendered to the approaching Allied forces from the west, on May 7, nearly 500,000 soldiers were still trapped in Berlin. Violent street fighting continued until May 8, when the circle was gradually tightened. At 2 a.m. on May 8, General Weidling, the highest-ranking commander in Berlin, issued a surrender call on the radio station. General Weidling surrendered to Soviet General Vasily Chukov at 6 a.m. on May 9th and signed the surrender document at 8:23 in the morning. Despite the surrender, some SS units continued to resist, but the war in Europe came to a complete end in the afternoon of May 9, when the Soviet flag was raised over the Reichstag building. If you enjoyed this video, please support us by hitting the like button. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.